The orc warband found her at dawn. Not in battle, not in a burning village, not clutching a weapon or screaming or running. They found her sitting cross-legged in the ash of what had been a human settlement called Harrow's End, drawing something in the dirt with a stick. Warchief Drog Sulvan held up one massive green fist, and his 27 soldiers stopped in their tracks behind him. He stood 6.5 feet of muscle and scar tissue, his tusks carved with the victories of 40 years of warfare, his iron pauldron still wet with the morning fog that rolled off the Keth River. He had led raids across 3 human territories. He had broken siege towers with his bare hands. He had once held a mountain pass for 11 days against an army twice his size. He had never in his life been stopped cold by a child drawing in the dirt. She was small even by human child standards. He judged her to be young, 6, perhaps 7 of their years. Her hair was the color of river mud, tangled and matted with the kind of neglect that took weeks to accumulate. Her clothes had once been a dress, probably blue. Now they were the color of soot and hard use. She had no shoes. Her feet were filthy, and her ankles bore the scratches of someone who had been moving through thorn brush. She was not crying. She was not afraid. She was drawing. Drog motioned to Sergeant Yura, who moved to his shoulder and squinted at the child through the dawn light. Yara was the oldest soldier in the warband, her gray-streaked braids pinned under a battered helm, her reading spectacles, a source of much fond ribbing, tucked into her vest pocket. "Human child," Yara said, stating the obvious. "I can see that," Drog said. "Alone?" "Yes. Drawing something." Drog exhaled slowly through his nose. "Yara." "What is she drawing?" Yara squinted harder. That was, in fact, the question that had stopped him, because what the girl was drawing was not random scratching. It was not the chaotic marks of a frightened child making shapes for comfort. It was precise. It was architectural. He could see from 20 feet away that she was drawing with intention, her stick moving carefully, referring back to points she had already made, extending walls, adding towers, marking what might have been gates. Drog moved forward. His soldiers parted. He walked across the gray-white ash of Harrow's End until he stood 10 feet from the girl and looked down at what she had made. It was a castle. Not a child's crude box with a flag, a real castle, or at least the real idea of one. She had drawn the outer curtain wall first, he could tell, a rough oval. Then she had added towers at 4 cardinal points and 2 more at the gate flanking. The gate itself had detail, a portcullis rendered in careful crosshatch lines. The inner courtyard was divided into sections. There, a space that might be stables there, something that might be a well. The keep rose from the center of the courtyard, taller than the towers, with narrow windows marked as vertical slashes. Around the outer wall she had drawn a moat line, and where the drawbridge would be, she had indicated chains with tiny repeated links. She had not looked up. She added a detail to the northwest tower, what appeared to be a balcony, or perhaps a battlement walk. And then she sat back and tilted her head, and studied her work with the expression of someone assessing whether a wall was plumb. Then she looked up at Drog. Her eyes were the dark amber color that some humans had, nearly gold in the dawn light. They were enormous in her thin face. They were calm. She did not scream. She did not run. She looked at him for a moment with those gold eyes, and then she looked back at her castle. "The North Tower is wrong," she said. Her voice was hoarse, as if she had not used it in some time. "It should be taller. A watchtower has to see over the curtain wall, or what's the point?" Drog Sulvan, warchief of the Keth River Band, veteran of 40 years of warfare, stood in the ruins of a burned human settlement and looked down at a small girl in a ruined dress, who was critiquing the architectural proportions of the castle she had drawn in the ash with a stick. He had absolutely no idea what to do. Behind him he heard Yura's voice, quiet and careful. "What do we do, Warchief?" Drog thought about it. "We make camp," he said finally. Yara blinked. Here. Here, he turned and met her eyes. We make camp, we build a fire, we cook something, and then someone brings the child food. He paused. Not in a bowl. Soldiers eat from bowls, bring it in. He looked around. His eyes landed on Corporal Tev, who was carrying wrapped travel bread in his pack. In the bread, wrap it properly, like a meal. Yara looked at him for a long moment. Then she turned to the warband and began giving orders with the calm efficiency of a sergeant who had long since learned that the war chief's stranger decisions usually made sense eventually. Drog turned back to the girl. She was still looking at the North Tower. He lowered himself to one knee, which still put him at twice her height, and looked at the castle from her level. Show me, he said. Where should it be? She glanced at him. The gold eyes assessed. She picked up her stick and scratched out the North Tower, then redrew it, taller, thinner, with a wider battlement at the top. There, she said. Now you can see the river approach and the South Road at the same time. Drog looked at the correction. It was right. The original tower had been the same height as the curtain wall. From that height, the wall itself would have blocked the line of sight to the South Road. The taller, narrower tower solved it. You've seen castle plans, he said. She shook her head. Then how do you know this? She shrugged one thin shoulder. I think about it. Where would attackers come from? Where do you need to see? Then you put the tower where it needs to be. She paused. My father said I think like an engineer. He said it like it was funny, but I don't think he meant it was bad. Drog sat with that for a moment. The past tense of asterisk said asterisk. The careful way she had phrased it, he said asterisk, not he says asterisk. He looked at the ruins around them. The ash. The burned-out foundation shapes of what had been houses, barns, perhaps a mill near the river. How long have you been here? He asked. I don't know, she said. A while, she paused. The food ran out 4 days ago, I think. I found water from the river. 4 days, alone in the ruins, drawing castles in the ash. What is your name? He asked. She looked at him. Something moved behind those gold eyes, not fear exactly, more like assessment, like she was deciding whether it was worth the investment. Myra, she said at last. Myra, he put his hand flat on his chest, a gesture of introduction that crossed most cultures in his experience. Drog. She looked at his hand, she looked at him, then she looked back at the castle. Your soldiers are making noise, she said. They are making camp. Are you going to kill me? The question was delivered in the same tone she'd used to discuss Tower Heights, flat, practical, as if she were asking whether it was going to rain. Drog felt something move in his chest, something old and heavy, like a stone shifting at the bottom of a river. No, he said. She nodded, as if this confirmed a theory she had already formed. She picked up her stick and began adding a second outer wall, a barbican, he realized, set ahead of the main gate. Good instinct. It created a kill zone. The food your soldiers are making, she said. Is it for me? Yes. Okay, she said and kept drawing. Hash part 2, the weight of small things. They fed her. She ate with methodical seriousness, like someone aware that food was a resource and not to be wasted or rushed. Corporal Tev had wrapped the travel bread with roasted bird meat and dried fruit the way you'd wrap a meal for a visiting dignitary, which was absurd, which was also exactly right in a way Tev probably couldn't have articulated but had somehow known. She ate every bite. She drank the water they brought. She did not say thank you until after she'd finished, and then she said it once, clearly, looking at Tev directly. Welcome, said Tev, who was 19 years old and had absolutely not expected to be moved by a human child's gratitude, and was. Drog observed all of this from a distance, sitting on a chunk of scorched masonry that had once been part of something, his armor off, his pipe lit. Around him, his soldiers moved with the practiced efficiency of a warband that had been together long enough that camp-making required almost no communication. Yara circulated. The fire grew. The girl, Myra, sat near the fire but not too near, close enough for warmth but not inside the circle of it. Another calculation, Drog thought, close enough to benefit. Far enough to leave if she needed to. She had her stick in her hands, and she was drawing in a clear patch of earth near her feet, smaller drawings this time, like she was working through variations. He watched her for a while. Then Private Scan, who was 22 and frequently demonstrated the judgment of someone who had not yet been hurt enough to learn caution, wandered over and looked down at what she was drawing. "What is that?" Scan asked. "Gatehouse," Myra said. "Looks complicated." Gatehouses are complicated. You have to fit the portcullis mechanism, the murder holes, the flanking positions, and the drawbridge chain anchor all in the same structure without making the outer wall so thick it's slow to close. Scan stared at her. He looked back at the drawing. "Those are murder holes." "Those slots in the ceiling." "Yes. You pour burning oil through them on attackers who get past the outer gate but before the inner gate." She drew another slot. "Or hot sand. Hot sand is better actually. It gets into armor and you can't brush it off." Scan crouched down and stared at the drawing with the expression of someone who had been surprised into genuine interest. "Where did you learn that?" "Books," she said, "and thinking." She glanced at him sidelong. "Where did you learn to fight?" "Training," he said, "then doing it." She nodded as if this confirmed something. "What's the hardest part?" Scan blinked. No one had ever asked him that. "The being afraid part," he said, unexpectedly honest. "Knowing it's going to be loud and confusing, and you're just trying to do your job." "That's why you train," she said. "So the job part is automatic and you only have to manage the afraid part." Scan looked at her. "That's what my father said," she added. Then she drew another line and said nothing else. Scan sat beside her for a while in silence. Then other soldiers drifted over, the way soldiers do when they're bored and something mildly interesting is happening. And then there was a small loose cluster of armored orcs sitting or crouching around a 7-year-old girl, while she explained the defensive advantages of a concentric castle design over a Matan Bailey. Drog watched this and smoked his pipe. Yara appeared at his shoulder. "What are we doing with her?" she asked quietly. "Taking her somewhere safe," he said. "Which is where exactly?" Drog thought about this. The human territories to the south were the obvious answer, but Harrow's End had been a human settlement and it had burned, and something had burned it, not his band. They'd arrived this morning, and he did not know what the situation was to the south. The Keth River Band's own territory to the north was, well, it was an orc warband's territory. It was not nothing, but it was not a human child's home. "The nearest settlement with a council," he said finally. "We assess what the situation is. We go from there." Yara was quiet for a moment. "She's small," she said. "Smaller than she should be, not just the not eating for 4 days small. She was small before that." Drog nodded. "Someone was not caring for her well," Yara said. "Or she was cared for and then lost." "Yes," said Yara, "or that." She paused. "She doesn't cry." Drog puffed his pipe. "No. Children cry, even brave ones. After 4 days alone in the ruins of their home, children cry." "This one draws castles in the ash," Drog said. Yara was quiet for a long moment. "That's something too," she said at last. "That's a different kind of holding on." They made camp for the night in Harrow's End, which none of them had planned, and in the morning broke camp and moved north by northeast along the river road. Myra walked. Drog had offered to carry her, or rather, he had offered to have one of the soldiers carry her, framing it as a practical matter of pace, and she had looked at him with those gold eyes and said, "I can walk." She could. She kept pace with the warband's road march without complaint, which was not a trivial thing. Drog set a pace that ate ground, and ground eating required legs. Her legs were short and she had no shoes and the road was rocky, but she walked with the focused expression of someone who had decided that this was happening and was simply executing it. By mid-morning she had fallen into step beside Yara, which surprised Drog until he thought about it, and then it didn't. Yara was female. Yara was old. Yara moved without aggression, without the showing off that young soldiers couldn't help even on a road march. Myra had identified the least threatening member of the warband and positioned herself accordingly. Smart, Drog thought. She's calculating everything. He let himself fall back until he was walking alongside them. "You said your father thought like an engineer," he said to Myra, in the conversational tone he used when he wanted information and didn't want to seem like he was interrogating. "Was he a builder?" "A soldier," she said. "He said engineers and soldiers think the same way, they just have different tools." "He wasn't wrong," Yara said. "Were you a soldier long?" Myra asked her. "All my life," Yara said, "since I was 15. Myra thought about this. "That seems like a long time to do one thing." "It is," Yara said, "but most things that are worth being good at take a long time." Myra was quiet for a while, her small feet moving steadily over the road stones. Then, "My mother played music. She said the same thing. That being good at it took a long time and she'd been playing since she was 4 and she was still learning." Past tense again, both parents now. Drog and Yara exchanged a glance over the top of the girl's head. Neither spoke. Sometimes the right thing was to let quiet be quiet. After another moment Myra said, "The castle I was drawing, in the ash, do you think someone could build it?" "With the right resources," Drog said, "yes." "How much would it cost?" Drog blinked. "To build a castle?" "Yes, materials." "Labor, how long would it take?" "It would depend on the size," he said slowly, running the mathematics in his head the way soldiers who had besieged castles inevitably learned too. "A full concentric design like you were drawing, outer wall, inner wall, 4 towers, keep. You'd need a large quarry access and several hundred skilled workers. 10 years minimum, probably 15. Myra absorbed this. "And what makes a castle last? Some of them fall and some of them last 1,000 years. "Foundations," he said. "How deep you go, how well you understand the land you're building on, and who maintains it. A castle that isn't maintained falls eventually no matter how well it was built." "So it's the people," she said. He looked at her. "It's not the stone," she said. "It's the people who keep it. The stone is just what holds the space while the people are doing their work." Drog walked in silence for several steps. "Yes," he said, "that is exactly right." Myra nodded, satisfied, and walked on. Part 3. The Council of Vethkarun. The settlement of Vethkarun was not a city. It was a walled market town of perhaps 3,000 souls, set at the confluence of the Keth River and the smaller Dar tributary, with gates of iron-banded oak and a council house that had been built from the same stone as the old fort that had stood here before anyone alive could remember. It was the nearest settlement of any size to where Harrow's End had been. It was, in the loose political geography of this region, the town that Harrow's End had traded with, grieved with, occasionally disagreed with in the way neighboring communities do. When Drog Sulvan's warband arrived at the gatekeepers went for crossbows. This was not unusual. Drog had passed through Vethkarun's gate twice before, both times under trade truce agreements, and both times the initial reception had involved crossbows. He raised his hand in the truce sign, open palm out, fingers spread, and waited with the patience of a man who understood that patience was a tactical advantage. "Sulvan," said the captain of the gate watch, a compact human woman named Dort whom Drog had met both previous times. Her tone was careful, not hostile. She knew him. "What's your business here?" "We found a child," Drog said. A pause. Dort looked at the warband. Then she looked at the small figure standing at Drog's right, slightly behind him, not hiding, but in the position of someone using a larger presence as a buffer. Standard positioning for anyone traveling under a larger group's protection. Myra looked back at Dort with calm gold eyes. "Human child," Dort said. "Yes." "Where?" "Harrow's End." The name hit the gate watch like a stone hitting water. Dort's face went very still. Two of the gatekeepers looked at each other. A third looked away. "She's the only one," Dort said. "Only one we found," Drog said. Dort was quiet for a moment. Then she opened the gate. They were met inside by a member of the Council of Vethkarun, a gray-haired man named Alderman Pess, who wore the look of someone who had received bad news multiple times in recent days and was developing a tolerance for it. He looked at Myra. He looked at Drog. He looked at Myra again. "Do you know her?" Drog asked. "Not personally," Pess said, "but I know of her family. They were," he paused, choosing words, "the Haraway family. They had land near the mill." He crouched down to be at Myra's level, which cost him some knee joint he apparently didn't enjoy spending. "Child, are you Elsa Haraway's daughter?" "My mother's name was Elsa," Myra said. Pess closed his eyes briefly. "Yes, you look like her." He opened his eyes. "I'm sorry, child, I knew your parents. They were good people." "I know," Myra said. "Do you have family? Grandparents, aunts, uncles, anyone?" Myra thought about it with the same systematic expression she brought to castle architecture. "My father's brother lives in Carden's Ford. Uncle Russ. He's a millwright." Pess nodded. "We can send word." He looked up at Drog. "Thank you, Warchief, for bringing her safely." He said it without irony, carefully, formally, because the situation required that acknowledgement to be made correctly. "She walked herself," Drog said. "She did not require carrying." Myra made a small sound that might have been satisfaction. They put Myra in the council house, while word was sent to Carden's Ford. The council house had a kitchen, and the kitchen had cooks. And the cooks, once they saw the thin, small girl with no shoes who had apparently survived alone in the ruins of Harrow's End for 4 days, produced quantities of food that could have fed several soldiers. Drog's warband was offered quarters in the trade garrison, which they accepted. Drog himself was offered the alderman's guest room, which he declined. He slept better in the open, and instead accepted a spot in the garrison's yard that had a good sight line to the council house. He was sitting there, armor off, pipe lit, watching the council house window where lamplight glowed, when Yara appeared and sat beside him. "She asked about you," Yara said. "What did she ask?" "Whether you were a good warchief or just a strong one." Dort told her you'd held to the trade truce agreements 3 times when you didn't have to, which she seemed to count as evidence. Drog smoked his pipe. "She's eating," Yara said. "The cook came out and told me she ate 2 full meals back to back and then asked if she could have paper and a pen. They didn't have paper, but they had a wax slate. She's been drawing castle plans on it." "Of course she has," Drog said. She asked the cook about the town's well situation, whether it was inside or outside the walls. She said a town this size with only one water source inside the walls would have a serious problem in a siege. Yara paused. The cook reported this to Alderman Pess, who reportedly went and had a conversation with the town's engineer about the possibility of a second cistern. Drog said nothing for a moment. "She's 7 years old," he said. "She may be," Yara said, "the most practically dangerous person I have ever met." Drog puffed his pipe. "She hasn't cried yet." "No." "She's going to," he said. "Probably when the uncle comes. Probably when there's someone safe enough to cry in front of." Yara nodded. "That's usually how it works." They sat in silence for a while. The lamplight in the council house window was steady and warm. "What happens to her?" Drog said. It was not really a question. It was more like saying a thing that existed out loud. The uncle comes, he takes her to Carden's Ford. She grows up, she becomes, Yara gestured slightly. Whatever she becomes, an engineer probably, or a general, or some combination of both that hasn't been invented yet. She'll want to build the castle, he said. Yes. She'll probably do it. Yes, Yara said. I suspect she will do exactly that. Part 4, the thing that was said. In the morning, Drog went to take his leave of the council house and found Myra sitting on the front steps in the early light. She had been given clean clothes overnight, a dress that fit her, gray and simple, and shoes, real shoes, which she was examining with the focused attention of someone new to them. She had been washed. Her hair had been combed and braided. She looked, for the first time since they'd found her, like a child who had people caring for her. She also had the wax slate in her lap and was drawing. She looked up when Drog's shadow fell over her. You're leaving, she said. We have our own road to make, he said. She nodded. She looked at the slate in her lap, then she looked up at him. I want to show you something, she said. He sat on the step beside her, which required some negotiation with his size relative to the step, but he managed it. She held out the slate. It was a different design from anything she'd drawn in the ash at Harrow's End. Smaller, more refined, clearly worked and reworked. He could see the impressions of erased lines in the wax. It was not a human castle design. The proportions were different. The walls were taller and thicker in some places than a human engineer would build them. The towers were placed in configurations that accounted for a different kind of attack, and the main gate had a design he'd never seen but immediately recognized as effective. It was, in subtle ways throughout, an orc design. Not a copy, not an imitation, a synthesis. It took the best of what she'd been thinking through and shaped it around what she'd observed in the past 2 days. The way the soldiers moved, the way they thought about sight lines and approach angles, the way Drog himself had instinctively analyzed her original North Tower problem. She had been watching all of it. She had taken all of it in and put it together into something new. You built this from watching us, he said. You build differently than humans, she said. You think about the approaches differently. You're bigger, so you think about height more, and you're willing to sacrifice more of the interior space to make the exterior harder to breach. Humans try to keep the interior efficient, but you accept the cost. She touched the gate design. This is yours. I mean, it came from watching the way Sergeant Yara moves through a space. She always checks the angles. I thought if the gate was shaped this way, there's no angle from outside that gives a clear shot into the interior, even if someone does breach the outer door. Drog looked at the gate design for a long moment. Yara would be embarrassed, he said, to know she contributed to defensive architecture. Don't tell her, Myra said. And for the first time, the very first time since they'd found her in the ash, something that was almost a smile moved across her face. Drog looked at it. It lasted only a second, and then she was back to studying the slate, but it had been there. He put his hand flat on his chest, the introduction gesture. After a moment she put her small hand flat on her own chest, the mirror of it. You'll build this one day, he said. He didn't ask it as a question. I'll build something, she said. Maybe this, maybe something better. I'll know more by then. He stood, he looked down at her. Myra, he said. She looked up. When you build it, he said, build deep foundations. Go deeper than you think you need to. The stone is just what holds the space while the people do their work. Her eyes went still for a moment, recognizing her own words coming back to her, fitted into something larger. She nodded once. He walked away down the morning street of Vethkarun and did not look back, because the warchief who looked back was not the kind of warchief his soldiers needed him to be. But he heard her behind him, the sound of the slate being turned over and a new drawing beginning. Part 5, what the elders said. The story of Drog Sulvan and the human child was not the kind of story that gets told right away. It was the kind of story that accumulates, that picks up detail as it passes from mouth to mouth, the way a river picks up silt. The broad strokes remain the same, the warband, the ash, the girl drawing in the dirt, but the weight of it changes depending on who is carrying it. Drog himself never told it directly. Yara told pieces of it, in the quiet late evening way that soldiers tell things that cost them something to carry. She was 7 years old and she ate 2 meals back to back, and then asked for something to draw on. Skan told pieces of it in the enthusiastic way that young soldiers tell things they haven't yet processed fully. She explained murder holes to me. She knew about hot sand getting in armor. I'm 22, and she made me feel like I didn't know anything. Corporal Tev told the smallest piece of it just once to a friend of his years later. I wrapped the food the way you'd wrap it for a dignitary, and I still don't know why I did that except that it seemed right. It was the right thing. The pieces traveled. They came together. And some years later, 5, 6, 7, the exact timing varies depending on which telling you trust, a council of Orc elders was convened in the great meeting hall of Kareth Sul to deliberate on the matter of the human settlements along the Keth River. The expansion of those settlements, the encroachment, some argued, on traditional orc hunting grounds, the question of what to do about it. The elders who convened were old and scarred, and had been deliberating on questions of this kind for decades. They were not cruel people. By and large, cruelty is a luxury, and people who have fought to survive for as long as these cannot afford luxury. But they were practical people, and practical people in their position had learned to make calculations that were not sentimental. They were presented with maps, reports, population figures. The arguments were made on both sides with the competence of people who had been arguing such questions all their lives. And then one of the elders, old Mura Sul, 90 years old and half-blind, but whose mind was still the sharpest blade in any room she entered, said, "Does anyone remember what Drog Sulvan said about the child he found in the ruins of Harrow's End?" A silence. "The child who drew the castle," said another elder. "Yes," Mura Sul said. "Does anyone remember what he said she told him?" No one spoke for a moment. Mura Sul said it herself, in the voice of someone reciting something that has been important for a long time. "The stone is just what holds the space while the people do their work." The silence that followed was different from the silence before. It had weight to it. It had the quality of a room full of old, experienced minds all arriving at the same place by different routes. "She was 7 years old," said an elder who had not spoken before. "When she said that, 7 years old, alone in the ruins of her village, and that is what she was thinking about." "She was thinking about what makes a thing last," Mura Sul said. "She was thinking about foundations. She was thinking about the work the people do." "The stone," said another elder slowly, "is just what holds the space." "And we are part of the space," Mura Sul said. "The human settlements are part of the space. The question is not what is stone and what is stone, but what work we are doing and whether there is enough space to do it." The deliberation that followed lasted 3 more days. The decision that came out of it was not everything anyone wanted. Decisions of that kind never are. But it was a decision that held, that was maintained, that was worked at, and the Keth River settlements did not burn, and the traditional grounds were negotiated rather than fought over, and something was built that lasted. No one would ever call it a castle, but it had deep foundations. Part 6, what Myra built. Carden's Ford was a mill town with river access, and more ambition than money, which is the ideal condition for a place that wants to become something larger than it is. Myra Haraway arrived there at 7 years old, thin and quiet, and carrying a wax slate covered in castle plans. Her Uncle Russ was a millwright, a large, gentle man who smelled of sawdust and river water and who cried when he saw her, which she had expected, and who held her for a long time, which she had not expected to need as much as she did. She cried too, Later, after they got home and the door was closed, and it was just the two of them, and the warm smell of the fire, and the sound of the mill wheel turning in the background. She cried for a long time, and her Uncle Russ held on and didn't say anything because there was nothing to say. And this was, it turned out, exactly what was needed. After that she slept for almost 2 days. After that she ate everything in the house. After that she asked her uncle if the mill had any engineering drawings she could look at. He showed her the plans for the mill's original construction, which were 40 years old and wrong in several places. Wrong in the sense that the person who'd built from them had made sensible adjustments during construction that never got recorded back on the plan. Myra spent 2 weeks correcting the plans to match the actual mill, going through the structure wall by wall, foundation by foundation, and producing an accurate document of what had actually been built. Russ showed this to the head builder of Carden's Ford, a man named Vel, who looked at it for a long time and then looked at the child who'd made it. "How old are you?" he asked. "7," she said, "almost 8. "You want to apprentice," he said. She thought about it with that systematic expression. "I want to learn everything you know," she said, "and then I want to learn what you don't know." Vel later said it was the best answer he'd ever gotten to that question, and he'd been asking it for 30 years. She worked with Vel for the next 8 years. She learned materials: stone, timber, iron, lime mortar. She learned foundations, how to read ground, how to test bearing capacity, how to go deep enough even when the client wanted to go cheaper. She learned water, drainage, wells, cisterns, channels, because water, Vel told her, was the enemy of everything you built, and also the thing everything you built was trying to keep in or keep out or move from one place to another. She learned how humans built, and then she went looking for how everyone else built. She was 15 when she first went north to the Keth River. She went to trade settlements, mill towns, crossing points where humans and orcs and the other peoples of the region met to do business. She went with tools and an apprentice's credentials, and the kind of practical problem-solving attitude that crosses most cultural barriers, because it is fundamentally about does this work rather than who are you asterisk. She spent 2 seasons working on a bridge project at the River Dar crossing. The bridge had been attempted twice before and failed twice before, and the failure was the same both times: the foundations. The river ran over a bed of clay that looked solid and wasn't, and both previous engineers had not gone deep enough to find the actual bearing layer beneath it. Myra went down until she found the bearing layer. The bridge stood. It still stands. She was 23 when she first met Warchief Drog Sulvan again. He was older, 60 now, the tusks deeply carved, the scars telling a longer story, and she was taller than she'd been but still would have been small even by human standards. She had her tools and her drawing case and the direct amber gold eyes that hadn't changed at all. He recognized her immediately. "You grew," he said. "You got older," she said. "Architects," he said, "are always insufficiently respectful." "Engineers," she said. "I'm an engineer. Architects make things look the way they should look. Engineers make them work." He laughed. It was a sound like a millstone moving. "What are you building here?" "A granary," she said. "Flood-proof storage. The current design loses grain every 5 years when the river rises. I'm moving the floor up and adding drainage channels under the foundation." He looked at the site. He looked at the plans she had under her arm. He looked at her. "Come eat," he said. "I want to see the plans." They ate and she showed him the plans and he asked questions. Good questions. Practical questions. The kind that came from a lifetime of thinking about how things held together under pressure. And she answered them and corrected 2 things she hadn't noticed before because his questions were the right questions. "You still think like a soldier," she said. "You still think like an engineer," he said. "My father told me those were the same thing." "Your father," Drog said, "was right." She was quiet for a moment, drawing something on the paper, a habit, barely conscious by now when she was thinking. Then she looked up. "I've been following what happened after Vethkarun," she said. "The Keth River settlements, the council decision." Mohi said, "Murasul told them what I told you, about the stone holding the space." "Yes." "That helped?" she asked. "That was part of why they decided the way they did." Drog was quiet for a moment. "You were 7 years old," he said, "in the ash of Harrow's End, and you were thinking about foundations, about what makes something last." He looked at her steadily. "Yes, that helped. That has kept on helping." Myra looked down at the drawing under her hands. She had been drawing, unconsciously, a castle. The same castle she'd drawn in the ash all those years ago, but refined now, 15 years of knowledge making it more precise, more correct, more real. "I'm going to build it," she said. "I know," he said. "Not now, maybe 10 years from now, when I have the resources and the right location and a client who understands what they're getting." "The right location matters," he said. "You taught me that." "The right location and the right people," she said. "The stone is just what holds the space. You need the people first, the people who will maintain it." "Do you have those people?" She looked up at him. She looked at the granary site. She looked at the rough collection of humans and orcs and others who were working the site together. A foreman who'd worked a dozen mixed crew projects. An orc stonecutter named Gresh who could read a bearing layer by touch. A human timber framer who'd learned his joinery from a halfling master who was 80 years old and still the best in the region. "I'm building them," she said. "I've been building them for years. Every project, every site. They're the real foundation. The stone is just what holds the space while they do their work." Drog Solvan sat back. He was 60 years old. He had fought in 30 campaigns. He had made decisions that changed the fates of thousands of people. He had sat in councils of elders and watched them deliberate and argued for things he believed in and accepted losses and held to what he knew was right. He had never, in all of that, stopped thinking about a 7-year-old girl drawing a castle in the ash of her burned home with a stick. "Yes," he said, "that is exactly right." Epilogue Foundations. The castle was built when Myra was 34. It stood at the confluence of the Keth River and the River Dar, which Myra had identified when she was 28 as the tactically ideal location. Controlling both river routes, with excellent sight lines in 4 directions and a stone shelf 40 feet down that could bear any load she asked of it. She had spent 3 years negotiating the situation that would make it possible. A joint commission from 3 different settlements, human and orc and mixed, who agreed that what the region needed was not a fortress of one people against another, but a structure that was everyone's. She had told them very clearly what she was building and why, and she had said, "The stone is just what holds the space. The space is for all of you. The work is what you do in it." They had agreed. It took 11 years to build. The outer curtain wall went up first, the foundations driven 42 feet down to the stone shelf, deeper than anyone thought necessary, exactly as deep as Myra had calculated from the first day she'd walked the site. The towers went up next, 4 primary, 2 flanking the gate, all positioned for maximum sight line coverage on both river approaches and both road approaches. The inner wall, the keep, the great hall that could seat 500 for council or treaty or celebration or whatever the people needed it for. The gatehouse was Yara's design, or rather, it was the design that Myra had developed from watching Yara move through a space 30 years before. No angle from outside gave a clean shot into the interior. Every approach was covered. Every exit was controlled. It was elegant in the way that good functional design is always elegant, not because it was decorated, but because every part of it did exactly what it was supposed to do. Drog Solvan was at the ceremony when the keystone went into the main arch. He was 71 years old by then, and he walked with a staff, and the carvings on his tusks had run out of room for new victories, and so the newer ones wrapped around and were smaller to fit. He stood at the front of the gathered crowd, a crowd of humans and orcs and others, perhaps 800 people from across the region who had come to see this thing completed. And he watched Myra Haraway, 44 years old with gray starting at her temples, direct the placement of the keystone with the same focused expression she'd had as a 7-year-old girl critiquing a north tower in the ash. The keystone seated. The arch held. The crowd was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that comes when something very large and very real becomes undeniable, and then they were not quiet anymore. Myra climbed down from the scaffolding. She walked through the crowd to where Draug stood, and she stood beside him, and they looked up at the arch together. "Deep foundations," he said. 42 feet, she said. He nodded. "The stone," she said, "just holds the space," he said. "While the people," she said, "do their work," he said. They stood there together under the arch they had built between them. He with his story, she with her plans, 37 years of accumulated work and grief and precision and patience. And around them, the people of the Keth River and the River Dar moved through the gates of something that would stand for a very long time. Because it had deep foundations. Because the right people were maintaining it. Because a 7-year-old girl had sat in the ash of her burned home and instead of nothing, had made something out of what she still knew, which was this: that if you build deep enough, if you go down to the bearing layer, if you understand what the space is for and who will work in it, then you can build something that holds. Even when everything else has burned. Especially then. And